Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Watier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Watier, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation. We are going to be talking about a brand new research article that came out of the Annals of Internal Medicine, and it's the effect of 4-3 intermittent fasting on weight loss at 12 months, a randomized clinical trial. So this bad boy checks all the boxes for a great conversation and action steps for you, the listener, for us to put into our day-to-day fasting lifestyle. So if you are brand new to the podcast, welcome in. You picked a good one to start listening. We're so grateful for you giving us a chance to be part of your fasting and weight loss and health journey. If you want to know more about why Tommy and I do what we do week in and week out in terms of our podcast, our coaching, our challenges, our resources on our website, go listen to episode 1. It'll give you some perspective into how fasting transformed our lives and ultimately why we feel called to continue to bring episodes week in and week out. If you are a long-term listener, we want to give you a shout out. We are very grateful for you being on this journey with us. And specifically, I want to give a shout out to Senior Citizen Seller. March 15th, 2025, left us our favorite kind of review, a 5-star kind. Yes. And it says, total immersion. Like Scott and Tommy, I started my fasting journey with Dr. Fung's books. I find that a great way for me to learn is total immersion. For that reason, I started binge listening to the podcast from the very beginning.
Wow.
I started the fasting lifestyle almost 8 months ago. I've lost 95 pounds to date.
Ooh.
And figure another 20 to 25 will put me where I belong. I'm all about their reports on the results of scientific studies and how we apply that information to our lives and situations. No, we did not pay this person for this review. So thank you, senior. I wouldn't even know how to do that. I don't know who you are. We just know you as Senior Citizen Seller. I do not want the opinion of yo-yos. This is a valuable podcast to me. So, Tommy, just incredible stuff.
Oh, yeah. Way to go, Senior Citizen. That's amazing. I bet you feel a little less or maybe a lot less of like a senior citizen these days after that incredible accomplishment. So keep up the good work. Keep doing the work, because obviously you're doing things that are working. So when you're doing things that are working, don't stop. Keep doing them, right? And keep adapting this long-term lifestyle. So we're really, really proud of you and super excited. Thanks for dropping that note, because we love to hear success stories.
And in complete contrast of the world that we live in the social media world, we got another review right after that of a 1-star variety, which thankfully we don't have many of, but a shout out to K-Bean, J-Bean, who says, 8 minutes in, and so far all I heard is the guy doesn't like apple cider vinegar. Lots of talking and filling in time without getting to the point of things. So I'd encourage you to go back and give another episode a try. To be honest, that's why we don't do a lot of single topic episodes like apple cider vinegar. But
they don't resonate with everybody.
Yeah, and as I said at the beginning of it, we weren't ever really going to talk about it directly. It's something we use in our coaching and we use as fasting optimizers. But because the research was so powerful to back the use of it, my bias came through. Never going to like the taste of it, but I am going to use it because I know the benefits. So shout out to lots of filler. Hopefully you can give us another listen and we can become part of your fasting journey and lifestyle as well. So Tommy, this article today, the effect of 4-3 intermittent fasting on weight loss at 12 months. It's a really cool study in terms of the outcomes that we saw from an anthropometric standpoint, from a weight loss standpoint. There's a couple of things in terms of fat mass and lean mass we'll get into. We'll talk about the 4-3 fasting style, this 4-3 intermittent fasting protocol compared to the control group. And I just think it's going to be a really great conversation. And there's going to be a lot of different points as a listener that you can take out and put into your long-term fasting plan. Because as we like to say, as we talk about lifestyle design, we don't want fasting or your diet strategy or your weight loss strategy to become your life. We want your life to be part of the plan. We want you to live a
Hmm.
full, energetic, confident life with healthy lab metrics and like the shout out that we gave for the 5-star review, going into those later decades, healthy, happy, and full of vitality, rather than what the statistics show is that as we age here in the United States, and now we're seeing it more globally, the quality of life typically depreciates. And there's a lot
Hmm.
of, that carrying that excess weight over the years affects us from a metabolic standpoint. So I think today's conversation, Tommy, is going to be really great. And I love the fact that this is a brand new randomized clinical trial that just came out. So it was tough to find the article link, but we found it. You can get the show notes or the link to it if you want to nerd on it like we do. Feel free to. But I'm excited for today's conversation.
Yeah, when we see any intermittent fasting study that's looking at greater than probably in the 2 to 3 month range, that's already kind of a new focal point for the research landscape. And so when we start to go out, then that gives us better data, better information on being able to adapt a long-term lifestyle, which is the goal. That is how we want to see fasting used, so that it's not just another diet. It's not just another on-off kind of roller coaster experience. And so when we're looking at it as a potential long-term tool, or just understanding the fact that we can take the same tools that help us get the weight off and then adapt them into a maintenance and into a long-term lifestyle, rather than, yeah, I used to be a faster, then I got the weight off, and then now I just don't. That's a future pacing mindset that kind of sets you up for failure. Whereas when you think about it in more long term terms, where, yeah, I'm going to adapt these tools over the long term for sustainability, then that's a better come from, in our opinion, for sure. And we see a lot more success that way. So this one's looking at 12 months, taking 160 some odd participants, going
Hmm.
through some good recommendations, and then also looking at some behavioral and emotional components that come along with
Yes.
food, right, and with relationship to food, and then compliance, adherence. Just a lot of good things that we're actually taken that we can take out of this study. You don't have to be a 4-3 faster. 4-3 is just one protocol for intermittent fasting, but we can take a lot of the things that we learned from this study and apply them to any fasting schedule that we're going to use. And so that's going to be cool to kind of go into the results here.
So this study has three key components that I really love, and this is the stuff that we do in our challenges and our coaching. Is that you don't need another diet plan or a meal plan or an exercise program, but the
Mm.
way that they structured the exercise component in here was really cool. It also doubles down, double downs,
Doubles
whatever I'm trying to
double
say.
It
Hey,
doubles
podcast.
down. Yeah, I
Hey,
think that's
Brad, leave
right.
that in. Um, peek behind the curtain. You could see how the sausage is made. Yeah, I don't know what I was trying to say there, but hopefully the point landed. It doubles down. Man, I tried it again and it still didn't work on a recent episode that we did in terms of alternate day fasting plus moderate intense cardiovascular training.
Hmm.
That zone 2 type training, what we saw was the best for weight loss, and then that lean muscle or lean mass retention, which allowed you to be in a better metabolic state. So I love that component. I love the component that it also had the relationship with food component in the binge eating questionnaires that they had, and how that
Hmm.
was an exclusion criteria, and how we saw the changes in the fasting group versus the control group, because then that speaks to the changes that we see in the percentages of the sustainability or the adherence score. So those
Hmm.
three components were really cool to see from a long-term sustainability point, where you just said, Tommy, is because we know the statistics don't lie that between the 2 and 3 year mark of someone that's lost either 5 to 10% of their total body weight, we know that 95% of the folks give it back. So
Hmm.
we want this to be adopted in that long-term fashion, AK, as what we say typically is begin with the end in mind. What does that
Hmm.
maintenance look like? So for me, it's fasting in some form on every given day. Is it a 30-hour fast or a 24-hour fast every day? No, it's not. But how do you maintain those changes? So I love that framework of beginning with the end in mind. I want to just frame out, Tommy, the kind of the outline of the study framework, the
Hmm.
interventions, and then the differences between the two groups. Then we'll get into the individual like weight loss findings, and then we'll talk about that food relationship and long-term sustainability component as well.
Okay.
So in the beginning, this is going to be looking at 4-3 intermittent fasting. So this is going to be fasting on 3 non-consecutive days. So not a 72-hour fast, but fasting on 3 non-consecutive days. So for some of you that are more experienced, it might sound like an ADF-ish type modified ADF schedule. Tommy has a good way to explain the differences in that coming up in just a few minutes. It compared to a daily caloric restriction, or the DCR group, right?
Okay.
And this is going to be compared with a high-intensity behavioral weight loss program. So that's going to be the behavioral lifestyle support plus the exercise component, or the moderate intensity, like 300 minutes a week of movement, right? So we can be taking on the weight loss body composition equation from both sides, right? So you're not just doing it in the kitchen, but you're doing it with a lifestyle change in terms of movement and exercise as well, because we know how important that is. So they looked at adults aged from 18 to 60 with a BMI of 27 up to 46. There was exclusions included diabetes, CVD, cardiovascular disease, eating disorders, and recent weight changes. So it was a really good exclusion criteria to start. And then the IMF group was non-consecutive fasting days per week, 3 of them, with 80% energy restriction on fast days, and ad libitum, meaning I don't want to say feast or free for all, but just do it intentionally, kind of, on the non-fast days. So there were some soft parameters there because everybody got the same lifestyle, food, behavioral coaching. And then the DCR group had a calorie deficit of about 34%. Here's the kicker, because there's this argument out there about calories in versus calories out versus the carbohydrate model of obesity, the carb intake model of obesity.
Insulin.
Carb insulin model of obesity, excuse me. And fasting is a tool. Fasting is a simplification for us, right? In that adherence category. So what I loved here is that this was done, this DCR group had a 34% daily reduction caloric restriction to match the weekly energy deficit of the IMF group. So they did their best to equate that calorie component, which I can't recall seeing in any of the studies that we've done up until this point. Now, we've done hundreds and hundreds, so I might be opening my mouth and inserting my foot. But I don't recall it, and we ran it through.
I don't either.
You know, so it's like, all right, well, 2 of us, so we'll go with 100%, batting average on that one. And then I love the fact that both groups received a structured high-intensity program with calorie counting, portion control education, and physical activity guidance, like that I mentioned, that 300 minutes of movement per week.
Yeah, and so like just equating for that caloric deficit is a very important point, because especially when you take that over months and months and out over the 1 year period, because that could definitely affect body composition changes, changes on the scale for sure, and then also adherence too, and feelings of restriction or omission versus long-term sustainability. So all of these things in mind, it's really important to actually control for that caloric intake. Now, they didn't tell them exactly what to eat, but like you said, they did give them some guidelines on approximate macronutrient ratios and things like that. And the one thing that I really like is when you give a soft recommendation for physical activity, what you do is you open up to long-term sustainability, because if we get prescribed a diet plan that we're told exactly what to eat or exactly what to do each day, then it's all temporary. It might lead to some long-term changes, but those won't be accounted for in like the reasons for success. So it's really like it's hard to draw realistic conclusions and behavioral changes whenever everything's like overly prescribed. And so this study did not bake in our opinion, like overusing prescription protocols.
Yeah, and that just speaks to the eat less, move more, biggest loser type weight loss strategies, right? So what we want to do is we want to create that sustainability piece. So I just want to go over some of the big key findings, and then we'll get into kind of the nitty gritty, and then we'll talk about the food relationship and the adherence component as well. So at
Okay.
12 months, the fasting group significantly greater weight loss. So we're talking minus 7.7 kilograms, right? Tommy, do the math. I'll give you a second. And uh,
17 pounds ish.
17, approximately 17 pounds. And the control group, the DCR, the calorie restriction group, was minus 4.8 kilograms.
Okay. So about what, like 11 or 12 pounds?
Yep. So the difference there was a 3 kilogram difference. So that's
Hmm.
statistically significant.
Hmm.
And from a greater than 5% weight loss in terms of outcome, right? And the greater than 10% total body weight loss,
Hmm.
the IMF group was at 58% for the 5% category, and the daily caloric restriction group was at 47%. So just 11% difference, right?
Hmm.
In the 5% category. But then when you get to the 10% weight loss category, almost 40% or 38% of the fasting group achieved greater than 10% weight loss of total body weight.
Hmm.
And the daily caloric restriction group only was at 16%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So overall, greater weight loss in terms of the fasting group at that 10% category, which we've done an episode recently on this where we talk about the prevention of diabetes or the remission of diabetes in that 10, 20, and 30% category. When you get higher up in the weight loss, you are getting dramatically statistically significant improvements in prevention or reversal of diabetes.
Yeah.
So huge to see that it jumps all the way almost to 40% of folks that
Yeah.
did this in this study achieved that marker, which is a great prevention slash remission or reversal possibility when it comes to blood sugar or insulin resistance or blood sugar type driven metabolic issues and disease.
Yeah, because remember, one of the exclusion criteria was having type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
So we didn't have current type 2 diabetics in this study, but um, there were definitely subjects with substantial blood sugar control issues
Well,
and
BMI that
potential.
went all the way up to 47.
Right, right. So you had like around 27 to 47 for BMI,
46
which
to
is
be exact. Sorry.
okay, which
Yep.
is a very large range and into the morbidly obese category
Right.
too. So that opens up a lot of blood sugar control issue possibilities for this wide range of patient population as well.
So I'll mention the adherence here too. The IMF group demonstrated better adherence to the 80% restriction goals over the study period. So the attrition
Mm,
rates were at 19% for the fasting group and at 30% for the daily caloric restriction group. Now,
mm,
if
mm.
anyone out there is listening that's done the calorie counting, macro tracking, burning the calories on the your choice of torture device at the gym, the treadmill, the elliptical, and or the stair climber, or the step counters, right?
Yep.
That's a big difference in terms of sustainability and adherence in the long term. So
Mhm.
the attrition rates were much lower. And you and I both, with our history of doing it the old way, then using fasting as the tool to get us there. That's a really big point for a lot of people that this is fasting. The fasting group or this fasting approach is much more. It for us. We talk of it from a simplification standpoint, right?
Mhm.
So it's not having to be so strict to your point earlier and so on point all of the time where fasting automatically kind of stacks the deck in your favor.
Mhm.
Never mind all of the other anthropometric and blood marker changes that we're going to talk about here in just a second.
Well, when you walk into a new plan or try to hit the gas on a new method to get a result that you're looking for, if you know that 1 in 3 people are going to end up not making it through this certain protocol, then it's really easy to
Roll the
start.
dice.
Yeah, it's really easy for that to start messing with your mindset and for your confidence and for your ability to actually push forward and lean into it. Whereas if you know that less than 1 in 5 will not make it through or will at some point stop using this method before a long-term endpoint like 12 months, then that's a lot better confidence because I can just intuitively, I just know there's a better shot for me to realistically come out of the other side with significant beneficial results rather than be like, okay, never mind. For whatever reason, this isn't working for me, or I don't want to do this anymore.
So let's talk about that component right now in the fact that when we're looking at these techniques or these skills that we're using,
Hmm.
when we're looking at the adherence category or the long-term sustainability category, a couple of things that really stood out here. Let's have that conversation now about this 4-3 IMF group versus what we've done a lot of episodes and coaching on is using ADF or modified ADF,
Hmm.
and we feel like there was some meat left on the bone here because this, if you look at this, the 4-3. All ADF is alternate day fasting. So a complete fasting day and then a feeding day, fasting, feeding day, fasting, feeding day, and you alternate.
Hmm.
The modified version is that you have a small mini meal of 500 or 600 calories, female to male, relatively speaking, on those fasting days.
Okay.
And the research there is really clear that that's a great strategy to move all of the needles in terms of blood sugar markers, lab markers, cholesterol markers, blood pressure markers, insulin resistant markers, all of that stuff. In this group, in this study, the IMF group is kind of like it's like the gateway schedule into being able to do an actual ADF, right, Tommy?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The boundaries that you put on within ADF are more beneficial because of um, there's greater control over some variables because within a protocol like this 4-3, you're gonna end up with greater volatility in the results, which starts with the on-off mentality of okay, today I'm fasting, tomorrow I'm not. The next day I'm fasting, the next day I'm not. Whereas built into alternate day fasting, it's not that's less likely to be the case because what we talk about with your nutrition days on alternate day fasting, we still look at those as opportunities to compartmentalize eating so that we have more better blood sugar control, better insulin control. And so it's
Better
not an
hunger
off day.
control, better
Yeah.
craving control, better all of that stuff, right?
Yeah, with intentional nutrition also, so that it's not an off day, it's not a feast day, it's not a refeed day. It's just a nutrition day.
Yep.
And so that distinction right there tends to lead to better, more consistent results, less of that on-off mentality, which can lead to more volatile results, like in the 4-3. So 4-3 is sometimes argued as like a softened up, lesser, or like you kind of implied, more of a beginner's or an easier version of an
Yep.
alternate day fasting, and that's not a bad way to think about it.
Yeah.
But that's also to say that there is more opportunity for even better results as you kind of stricken make those boundaries or those guidelines a little more strict as you kind of go through it.
They even mention it in the original research. They mention that they've done similar stuff in the past where it's fast and feast days. But
Hmm.
in this study, in contrast, the pattern of energy intake from the diaries that they tracked the patients with in this trial showed better adherence to the distinct fast and non-fast days. To your point, those should be fueling days, right?
Hmm.
That doesn't mean you have to eat 3 meals a day plus snacks and go back to the old model, right? That means you
Right.
can still compartmentalize those fueling days or those nutrition opportunity days, which is how we think about it. And that really leads right into one of the distinctions we want to make up front before we go through some of the other changes and the distinctions that we saw between the clinical results in terms of the metrics they were tracking, is that the macronutrient breakdown here was 55 carb, 15 protein, and 30 fat.
Mm.
We typically like to recommend 30 to 40% protein. And that's been when we did that recent podcast on, I believe it was episode 271. It was clear that upping that protein number to 30% was dramatically better for body composition changes in the long term.
Right.
So if this is the part of the episode where I like to say, my dad does this all the time. Shout out, Dad. Reverses diabetes of 30 years, lost 65 pounds, off 120 units of insulin and 15 other
Wow.
medications.
Incredible.
Shout out to you making the change at age 70, by the way.
Hmm.
But he does this like when we go to restaurants or we travel or growing up. It was like, man, if I built this house, I would have put that wall over there. If I designed
Yeah.
this restaurant, I would have made the kitchen over here. So this is the point of the episode where we say, if we would have done this study,
Hmm.
we
Yeah.
would have liked to have seen the protein, and it's an inside family joke too. So we would have liked to have
Hmm.
seen the protein higher and more of that ADF type schedule, because you left about 30%, Tommy, of the effect when compared to the fasting times and the clean nutrition opportunity times in a true
Yeah.
ADF schedule by doing this kind of intermediate 4-3 IMF. The cool thing is that we got the
For sure.
results with this. So we can extrapolate out. Obviously, it's anecdotal, but we see it inside of coaching and the client results that we see,
Hmm.
that by making those couple of changes, man, you're just going to accelerate those results that we're about to go over
Yeah.
statistically or clinically here even greater.
Yeah, and decrease the volatility, and
Yeah,
also increase the statistical power of an experimental design like this as well. So it's easier
yep,
to find statistical significance and greater between group differences when you accelerate the progress from one of those groups. So, like you said, a little bit different design means very, very much a different outcome. And not only on the protein component, because protein doesn't happen by accident, as we
right.
say. Protein is also metabolically, it's your powerhouse macronutrient. But
It's your
then
hack. It's I
it
mean, it's your
for
it's
sure.
your it's your burn, it's your satiation, it's your
Hmm.
cravings, it's fullness, it's hunger cues, it's all of that stuff. Protein is such an optimizer to this process. So to your point, it's something that we definitely double down on.
For sure, lean muscle mass promoting. I mean, it's incredible. And speaking of that, if there was another suggestion or version 2.0 of this study, that would be to include some form of resistance exercise, because
Yes.
that's also an important point that we're always looking at that. What are the results? How are the differences between lean muscle mass? And so they point out a difference in the change in lean muscle mass. They point out more lean muscle mass lost actually in the 4-3 group
Yep.
versus the caloric restriction group, which is not a finding that we typically see in a study like this.
And it's
But
not statistically significant, but it is greater.
right. And so it's important to see which way those arrows are facing. But again,
Yep.
when you have this patient population, you have 27 to 46 on the BMI scale, and there's no form of resistance training involved in the protocol, you get a fairly wide range, and you get an opportunity where long-term caloric restriction is not optimal just to continue to do that, as far as muscle mass preservation without the use of resistance training. And we absolutely would want to see resistance training included on a very consistent basis with more deliberate protein as well.
Yes.
15% protein and no resistance training, that's a recipe for disaster, regardless of if you're fasting, if you're caloric restriction,
Yep.
or anything else, especially as you age too.
Yep, for sure. And it's interesting because I saw this posted, where I saw the article was following Dr. Fung on X, and some of the
Hmm.
comments are like, "What's the difference between this? Sounds like ADF. What about
Hmm.
resistance training? What
Right.
an interesting fasting protocol. I guess it's better than nothing." So a lot of the stuff we're talking about is funny because it's in the fasting community, and
It's
they're
on
like, "Well, wait a
everybody's
minute,
minds.
yeah, hold on,
Yeah,
this could be better."
for sure.
So I want to highlight a couple of the other uh, metrics that were tracked. So we talked about the weight, right? So
Mhm.
7.7 kilograms to 4.8, so a difference of about 3 kilograms in terms of total weight loss. The greater adherence and the greater percentage in the 10% total body weight loss. The BMI came down, so there was a difference of an entire point on the BMI scale. The
Mm.
waist
Nice.
circumference, so there was a difference between 2.5 centimeters of waist circumference between the fasting group and the calorie restriction group. And that's a key indicator for us because of the visceral adiposity or that central weight gain, that waist circumference or that waist to height ratio, which is an
Yes.
indicator of insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction.
So it was better on the IMF group, right?
Yeah, correct. So
Okay, good.
2.5 centimeters more in the IMF group. Fat mass was 2.1 greater. And this is where we saw the lean mass that you had mentioned already, those changes, slightly more in that fasting group, but not just focusing on getting your 10,000 steps or your 300 minutes of cardio each week, but adding in that resistance training and that protein pacing.
Absolutely.
The blood pressure changes for systolic was better in IMF. Diastolic was slightly better in the calorie restriction group. Total cholesterol was the changes were 2.68 in favor of the total in terms of milligrams decrease in the IMF group. There was an actual slight increase in the daily caloric restriction group. HDL cholesterol was about the same. LDL cholesterol was slightly decreased in the in the DCR group. The triglyceride level, however, was a dramatic win for the fasting group. So a total decrease of 24 milligrams in the fasting group. Now, the DCR group had 15, but there was a difference of 10. So the IMF group had 10 points lower. HOMA-IR decreases in both, greater in the IMF group.
Okay, so that's your insulin resistance.
Yeah, the gold standard for insulin resistance, right? The HOMA-IR scale. Yep. Sorry, I was just in a flow there. So thank you for the clarity on that for the new listeners specifically. Fasting glucose. So we saw a 3.5 point drop in the IMF group and a 1.5 drop. So a difference of about 2 in terms of the fasting glucose level. A1Cs were about the same. And the interesting here in the exercise component, and then we'll get into the binge eating score and the food component of this, or the food relationship point of the conversation before we wrap up today's episode. But the MVPA, so the minutes per week, the change in both groups was a dramatic increase in activity level, and the total step counts both went up in both groups as well. So that's great adherence from hey, this is a sustainable, coachable lifestyle change, which I really like to see. Even just getting moving. So when people say, oh, I need to start, what workout should I be doing? We're like, just start walking. And then when you start walking, then add a weight vest. Then add in some resistance training. And we won't go back to the handful of previous episodes that we did recently on that. But that really is a key sustainability piece, which leads into this binge eating scale score, which we thought was really cool and a great part of the addition into this study that we really loved.
Yeah, when you have a soft recommendation like in this protocol, to have some moderate intensity physical activity, and then it leads to positive changes in those actual in the building of those habits over the course of a year, that's a great sign. It's a great sign that having some boundaries for when and how you're eating, and in order to hit certain targets, that you're able to stack on top of that some other healthy habits that go along with better health, better longevity, better blood markers, all of these things. That's a really, really good sign. And I like that they included that, even though they weren't dogmatic in what they required from the participants. And so that was good. This was really interesting because we don't oftentimes see the binge eating scale score included in the studies that we review. So it's really good because every single person, I mean, I've never met a single person who's wanted to lose a substantial amount of weight or who's tried multiple times in the past and not had any relationship with food improvement that they could benefit from, whether they were aware of it at the time, or it can take time to kind of understand that, hey, that's part of my journey, or that's part of my what I could improve. Like for me, it was kind of under the surface for a long time. I wasn't really aware of it for years, and then kind of stumbled onto Salt, Sugar, Fat, a great book that we've talked about in the past, and then that helped me kind of see it like, oh wow, there is something going on here. So to include binge eating scale score here, and what we saw is that these were not binge eaters, as you mentioned before. That was actually an exclusion criteria. if they were at past a certain point with with binge eating behavior. But what we did see is an actual over a 2 point improvement on that scale for the IMF group, whereas it was only 10% of that. It was 90% less of a change, almost a zero change. It was a 0.25 change for the caloric restriction, the DCR group. And so what's substantial there is that without deliberately focusing on food relationship or binge eating behavior, quote unquote, um, there was still the compartmentalization, the intentionality of the fasting group still led to some changes with the frequency, the severity of how often these participants were thinking about food, and especially behaving with food in a way that really doesn't serve their long-term goals, more of an emotional response to the food. And to see some improvement there when that really wasn't a focal point at all
Yep.
is, I mean, that in and of itself, if there was no other changes, if there were no other differences between the two groups and that was the only one there, that would be enough
But
of a reason to go, that's the method. I like
yep,
that one.
I choose this one
Yeah.
just because of that outcome. Man, that was we didn't talk about that while we were prepping for today's episode, but I love that takeaway
Mm,
because
so
that is what
powerful.
we hear 70 to 80% of the surveys in the 6,500 folks that have gone through our challenges, that's what they report at the end of the challenge is now what about food? What do I do with the hungry,
Of
angry,
course.
lonely, tired, bored, and stressed behaviors that I have? Well, that's the stuff that we need to work on. So
Hmm.
I love that this was a component, right? That support piece was a component of this study over the 12 months.
Yeah.
Um, and I love that this was very clinically significant, right? Like you mentioned, a 2.23 change in the scale from 11.5 down to 9.5 on the binge eating scale, where it went from 12.7 to 12.4 in the daily
The
caloric
caloric
restriction
restriction.
group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So to me, that reminds me of being on my journey where I was always white knuckling it,
Hmm.
right? White knuckling it on my weight loss strategy. And then when I started consistently fasting, that got way easier,
Yeah.
right? And we've talked a lot about the hunger cues and all of that stuff. So this was a really great outcome. And the binge eating scale was actually created in 1982, and it's a 16-item questionnaire used to assess the presence of binge eating behavior. What you probably hear about more in today's world, in terms of the diet world and the weight loss world and the fasting world, is what we call food noise. So we
Mm-hmm.
know the higher you go up in those BMI categories, love or hate BMI, right? It's just we don't love it, but we did a whole episode on the body roundness index, which takes into the waist circumference and the visceral adiposity, which is
Oh
much
yeah.
more of a driver for us. But the more you go up in those categories, from 25 to 30 in overweight, 30 to 35 obese, 35 plus, morbid obesity, in that normal to overweight group, you're making 226 food related decisions a day, whether or not you know it.
Mm.
And every category you go up, you add 100 more decisions,
Wow. Talk about food noise. That's so
right?
much.
So the
Yeah.
food, no, we live in an obesogenic food environment. We live in a high advertising food. There's food ads. I mean, Taco Bell has their entire like menu based around fourth meal, right? Like
Hmm.
this extra meal you should be eating, right? Don't get me wrong. I used to love me some Taco Bell. Okay.
Yeah.
My body didn't love it, but I loved eating it. I loved the
Right.
dopamine hit from it. So I love the fact
Sure.
that this was a clear dividing line here in one of the main takeaways of the study. So as we wrap up today, Tommy, um, we've mentioned a couple of things that we've liked to have seen change. We like that protein focus. We like the resistance training component.
Hmm.
We like the fact that this is kind of a segue or a gateway into being able to do longer ADF. So if you're looking for support, head to the show notes. You can grab the Blueprint to Fasting for Fat Loss. If you're looking for the support, the fasting schedules, and kind of an acceleration of this learning curve, that's
Hmm.
why we do our challenges.
Yep.
So the link for that's in the show notes as well. But Tommy, as a big picture takeaway of how folks can take a piece or two of this out of this episode,
Hmm.
let's land the plane and give them like a couple of ideas of takeaways on how we can implement this into our fasting lifestyle starting today.
Sure. So I would say that the protocol used here, 4-3, is not one of the most popular fasting protocol. So a lot of fasters haven't really used 4-3 in the past.
Yeah, more like
And
16-8, 18-6,
yeah,
those types of time restricted eating, time restricted feeding, all those different terms that you can name it, label it.
right. So what I think is a cool takeaway from this and from the positive benefits of this are taking like a 4-3 kind of protocol like this. If you're looking to kind of mix up your fasting plan or your fasting schedule for the next few weeks, then I would take this 4-3 and then combine it with what you're doing right now, which might be like, let's say it's 16-8 or 18-6. And then so on the non-fasting days, then put in your 16-8 or your 18-6. And then
There you go.
on the next day, then use what they did here, which would be like just 20% of your nutrition needs, or like you mentioned with the alternate day fasting
Yep.
earlier, which would be like 500 or 600 calories on those fasting days. And then you can integrate some of what they have here and actually improve on your results too by kind of integrating that 16-8 or 18-6, or maybe it's a 20/4 to get in your nutritional needs. And so put the intentionality behind both of those days without feeling like it's an on off fast feast. Because when we do that, we increase mental and mindset volatility, which then
Yep.
leads to more volatility on the scale and within our results that we want to control for that more.
What I just heard was, I just imagined and pictured in my head was me at the bowling alley with the bumpers up.
Okay, yeah.
Like putting the bumpers on, right? Putting the bumpers on and trying to remove some of that slippage that can happen with clean fasting
For sure.
windows and that feast mentality. So absolutely love it. So the effect of 4-3 intermittent fasting on weight loss at 12 months, a randomized clinical trial in the Annals of Internal Medicine, just came out this month, 2025. So hope you enjoyed the episode, Tommy. I know I enjoyed the conversation as always, man, and we'll talk soon.
Me too. Thanks. Bye.
So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.